Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As usual, it's my pleasure to have such an extraordinary guest. Today, we've got Clay Nelson, who I've known for probably pretty close, Clay, I'd say to 20 years,
Pretty
right?
much. Yeah.
I met Clay back when he was with Rational Software, and then after IBM acquired Rational. And yeah, it's been a long time, and he's currently the vice president of sales at GitHub. And he just has an amazing background, both professionally, and my tagline for Clay is the entertainer. Clay's got an amazing voice. He plays guitar. He's a magician. He draws. Just a man of many talents.
Jack of all trades is
Jack of all trades. So yeah,
master of
Clay,
none.
it's great to have you here today, and to kind of continue our theme that we've got going for this month, which is the mindset required for an agile way of working. And with that, I'll ask you to just kind of start off with a couple of your thoughts before I see we've already got questions coming in. So
Awesome.
yeah, share some
Well,
thoughts.
yeah, I appreciate the invitation, and this is definitely one of my favorite topics is not talking about tooling, but talking about the culture and the people that are always usually the impediment. I said always usually the impediments to change and adopting new methods, and so having something that engineers I think have historically eschewed away from a little bit, but it's really the heart and soul really of how to get things done.
Yeah, and Clay's just seen so much in the various companies that he's worked for, both back when he was doing more sort of the consulting-ish work, and now where you're at. And one of the questions that we've got coming in, which is from Susan, is how has remote work accelerated the need to adjust your process? What have you seen, and what can you share?
So I mean, the pandemic accelerated, I think, a trend that we were already seeing at GitHub, which is more and more asynchronous work, and learning to operate the way the open source community works. I mean, you've got people from around the globe who aren't obviously in the same room, and doing traditional stand up type of meetings that we've long been doing with Agile, and yet we still manage to get critical software that the world depends on develop. And so how can you learn from that and bring that inside of your own organization, even if you don't intend to actually release any of the IP out into the world in an open source license, you can still learn how to do that. And one of the critical things there is that people are now having to operate on different schedules. Not everybody's able to come in at 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever, because we've got people who are taking care of family members, or the kids aren't in school, and so you've got to learn how to adapt. And so working asynchronously is probably the biggest thing that people are having to learn how to do, and what are the methods and the behaviors that everybody has to adopt in order to make that work seamlessly. And it's been a big challenge for organizations who are really have spent their entire existence coming into conference rooms and meetings and whiteboarding and that energy in the room. So that's probably been the biggest thing that you have to evaluate. And for us, it's we've long had part of our culture. You write things down way more than you might have previously. Everybody is writing down what happens. It's not just meeting notes and updating user stories. It's a great deal of detail that happens right next to the code, and that's probably the biggest thing that I think we've seen.
Yeah, and so yeah, everything you said, right? I'm seeing that at some of the customers we're working with as well, and and some of the changes and just what has to be permitted to make this work right over this past year. One organization in particular, they use lots of contractors and consultants, and the mindset used to be you can't trust a contractor or consultant unless you can have oversight over watching what they're doing. Well, you can't do that now, and I think some of what hopefully we'll continue to see, long lasting is that some of these new behaviors and new just ways of working are going to stick around once we
Yeah.
do finally get back to where we could be coming into an office or we could be co-located. The practice of documenting that you just mentioned, I mean, that's something that I would imagine you're going to want to see at your organization as well as customers, stay in place, right? There's, I mean, the right size of documentation, but yeah, I mean, that's probably solving all sorts of issues
Yeah,
that you.
it's just, I mean, it's not sort of the old waterfall definition of documentation, right? It's not like, oh, you document this and then it's really documenting. So many people are uh, having conversations closest to the code.
Mhm.
And some of the methods that we've long held are still valid, but um, trying to minimize that document flow and go straight to the code. And it does have cultural impacts. It has impacts on the kind of people that you hire. People can't be afraid to be next to the code, right? So I mean, uh, but you want to minimize the number of hops between uh, information steps from the code to decisions about the code, be their requirements or design, etc.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I've heard Clay speak about in the past is social computing and what that means with respect to maybe, developers that are working on open source ways of working, and they want to bring that into the organization. And so Clay, what are some of the things you can share as far as like what is social computing for those that might not have had exposure to this? And what does it take for organizations to start moving in that direction or actually embrace it?
Well, so I like to talk about it really as kind of the history of GitHub. GitHub GitHub started really actually as a side project. The founders were going to build sort of a competitive product to Facebook back in the 2006 2007 timeframe, and they built a web interface to Git because Git was pretty complicated for who were just learning. It was fairly new, and so as they started showing this to people, people loved it, and then they said, "All right, well, if we're going to build this thing, we need to not think about a software development tool." They didn't go out and look at, all right, I mean, rational Jazz platform was probably 2 or 3 years old at that point, and they didn't look at any of that stuff. They started with social networks. They looked at LinkedIn. They looked at Facebook and said, let's build something that works the way people share. And so sharing and thinking in terms of the actual networks of people that are going to collaborate on information, make it easy for that information to flow through the network rather than building it, taking a hierarchical approach, and think about the organization as the artifacts that you develop inside of a hierarchy and flow those over to another hierarchy is really just a loose weight coupling of teams that are going to develop and share again closest to the code. And so that was really more the inspiration than what had been sort of the an enterprise view of software development tooling, which was, yeah, standardize on something, but you create little small teams around code, which mirrored really the applications that those teams were uh, developing, right? So if you're building a claim system, you didn't really need to, the membership team didn't need to really know that much about the the claim systems inner workings, right? Those teams were pretty isolated, so you didn't need to collaborate. Customer experience is kind of breaking those silos down because you have to now present to the end user a different interface, and you don't want a bunch of different interfaces, right? So all of those things, the architecture is really has driven the need for social coding even more so. There's a relationship there that's pretty important.
So I guess one of the other things then that I would ask is, as far as some of what you're kind of seeing in practice is, do you have customers, organizations you're working with that, have moved towards taking an agile way of working? And what are some of the things that you've seen that have either been an enabler of that or still, an impediment that, a lot of organizations share some of the same impediments when they're trying to really move towards a path that's away from traditional, or what we know as traditional.
Well, so when we are seeing a lot of folks that are now trying to adopt this, what's the industry has called inner source, which is um, taking the way open source works and bringing that inside of their own organizations. And
Mhm.
then they run into the impediment of incentives. I'm a VP of this organization, and I have these systems that my team manages. I don't have time. We have our own feature list and backlog that we've got to get to. We don't have time to do yours, give us whatever request, and we'll feed that into our backlog, and
Yeah,
we'll
we'll just keep
triage it
our
and work it
silo.
whenever we can. And so and part of that has been, I think, reinforced by a legacy of uh, not even just tooling, because you can go in and have the exact same tooling as we were saying a minute ago.
Mhm.
It's access and transparency into those backlogs and work streams that enable you to start to break down those silos.
Mhm.
And so you got to really think about the incentive structure, but you also have to make sure that as simple as inverting that equation or inverting that view, instead of saying um, by default only this team can see the code and the feature and the features in the backlog, to be much more transparent and open inside the organization to the extent that you can. There's of course constraints and in regulatory constraints that prevent some, but as we dig in and have these conversations, way more often than not, um, it's more of a matter of uh, custom and culture than it is actual regulatory constraint that prevents you from sharing. And so when you share, the benefit is I can go in and see the code, and I go, well, all I need really is you to insert this update to this method, uh, and maybe go change some database structures. And maybe I go and maybe I can. It's a heck of a lot easier to do that on the interface code, but I go and I make those changes myself, and then I submit a pull request is the term, which is basically I'm going to write the code for you, and I'm going to send it to you, and you decide when to contribute that code back into the main branch and accept it. But that transparency um, enables sort of a democratization of addressing this technical debt that usually prevents people from uh, getting around to the backlog that people need work done if you want to try to truly truly pull people together.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate. I've been spending a lot of time with Al Shalloway, who's at PMI, that's responsible for the Value Stream Consultant Program. And one of the just continuing messages all the way through the course that's coming out, and just the body of knowledge itself, is make all work visible and make all workflows visible, and how important that is, but just how challenging it is to be able to get that to happen across an organization.
Yeah.
Right? Pushing people out of their comfort space. Again, protecting what they feel is theirs. And again, maybe how they are compensated, or just the empowerment that they've got because of what they're under, they have under control. And yeah, that's such a difficult one to, to get movement on.
It is, and um, it does. It really starts. Well, we think about change, and you and I've talked about old Cotter frameworks for years, and
Yes.
but and you may remember this quote from way back then, but it was from Larry Bossidy, who's the CEO at Honeywell, and they had a book. He and Ram Charan, is still one of my favorite quotes, and it's that people act themselves into a new way of thinking rather than thinking themselves into a new way of acting. And so you cannot just say, all right, we're going to start sharing.
Right.
Everybody start sharing,
Right.
because there's or hey, we've got GitHub now. We're more transparent. It doesn't just work that way. First of all, there's plenty of organizations that we still work with that are uh, by default, they if you're not part of the organization or you're not part of the repository, you don't see anything, and that's, for a variety of reasons. But when you really want to talk about changing the culture, that is probably one of the biggest things that you can do is make the code uh, uh, open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've got a question from TJ, and TJ is asking what technical trends or adoptions will have the biggest impact on culture in your experience?
Um, so the I guess maybe first let's define culture real quick. I mean, it's one of those big words, and my dog is in here now. Come upstairs and is scratching on the door over there, so I apologize. If you think about culture, is really what people believe about the behavior that gets rewarded or punished. It's not the mission statements or the value statements that you see written on the wall or on the intranet. And so, what are those things that are changing um, the culture? Well, uh, as people are adopting more and more uh, service orientated architectures or designs, adopting containers, that is it's sort of fragmenting the applications. And we know that there's a relationship between the organizational structure and architecture. We know that from Conway's law, right?
Right.
Which is roughly, if uh, people are going to, the systems that you build are a representation of the communication structures of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So um, when you're breaking an application up into smaller services, then there's an opportunity for you to collaborate differently, and that collaboration though it requires a heck of a lot more trust, and so that I'm sorry, one second, dog driving me nuts. I'm losing my concentration here. Um, I think that that's one of the things, because it really, you're moving away from these big monolithic applications where you have a culture that can be associated with this team, into fragmented, so much smaller teams, and it changes the dynamic of the collaboration.
Yeah. So Paul Sims is in attendance today. Actually, I was on a chat earlier with Paul, and Paul says that he's got a quote from Al Shalloway, and he says, "You have to work your way into a new way of thinking rather than think your way into a new way of working." So yeah, it's
Yeah.
also just all those things are so connected in what we see, and getting back to the cultural aspect. One of my favorite quotes is, culture will eat strategy for breakfast every day.
Yeah.
You're not attending to the culture. It's so difficult, whether you're trying to adopt, right, a new, an agile way of working, you're trying to adopt, new tool functionality. Let me ask you, how many times have you seen customers that are moving to your company's product and they're just configuring it the same way that a tool they're replacing from 20 years ago, right? So they're just not getting the benefit. They're not taking the
So
opportunity that they've got.
unfortunately, probably way more than I'd like to admit. There's I'm looking over here on my bookshelf. And I think there's a book called Digital Darwinism, and at the beginning of that book, I can't remember, Tom something or other is his name, but a great example of beginning of the 19th, or I guess 20th, early 20th century was late 19th century, when the British uh, uh, textile manufacturers were moving from steam to electricity. Um, they they basically put in electrical units in the exact same place that the steam units were, and didn't recognize that they could completely re-engineer the factory floor, that the technology fundamentally changed the assumptions about how you should work.
Right.
And that, that's really is where what we see a lot of times is people take um, uh, old branching structures that they were accustomed to with Subversion, because it was very difficult for you to branch and merge code in
Mhm.
Subversion. Git changes all that, but you haven't. A lot of organizations that just took their old workflows and replicated those using a new version control system, not recognizing that Git enables you to do much more in parallel than you used to. And again, this is back to one of those things where there's a relationship between the architecture, the code management, and the culture. In this sense, that well, if it's very difficult to branch and merge, I'm going to try to organize my architecture and organize the teams into a way that I don't do that often. So then it serializes the work, and uh, Git fundamentally altered all that, and but yet it has not rippled its way out into organizational design in many cases. I'm still working the same way that I had, especially if I haven't adopted more of a product mentality. I'm still, in a everything is a project, and that's another trend I think we, continue to see. Um, still a lot of places that are very project oriented, but if you again orient it towards a customer experience, outside in, sort of a voice of the customer, and think about things in terms of products. It's the claim. It's not the claim system. That claim system is the product, right? It's not just a bunch of projects that impact that. It's you want to build a team that supports this product, and all of those things I think come back to or impact the way teams work, and it creates a little bit more stability in the value that you're delivering out to the customers, and it's not quite as transient.
Yeah, and we see that so often also, the tie-in that I'm going to now have into, just what you're seeing from a tooling perspective. We see that so oftentimes with sort of in the process space, right? Where you've got an organization maybe that is trying to move to, adopting an agile way of working, or they've already done that, but they're still really working maybe, agile in name only, right? It's mostly a very traditional heavyweight
Yeah.
approach. They are focused around projects versus product teams, or having, focused solution teams that are really there to support the value stream, right? And all what needs to happen to actually create value to the customer. So it's, sometimes it's a couple of different sort of layers you peel back to be able to say, this is how we can be much more, efficient and effective as an organization. So it's both sort of the tooling and the processes around that, and then just the approaches that the organization is really able to make strides in really adopting.
Yeah, and the back to this idea of transparency, because I think that really, I think it's critical to make sure that the culture is supporting the architecture that is the biggest trend, right? And so if you don't have transparency and you're trying to adopt these lightweight services, you're going to find yourself having to coordinate way more, and then the bottleneck becomes the planning, and you can't, nobody can do that. It just, there's too much and it's happening too fast. If you try to use those old methods and slow down, then you're going to basically miss your market opportunity, or your competitor is going to deliver functionality a hell of a lot faster than you are. And so the answer to that is to provide a lot more power to the edge, give the developer more opportunity to make those changes. And so that comes with this thing that we call interservice. Or it's a term that was first coined by Tim O'Reilly, and I would definitely encourage folks who are not familiar with it, go out and join InterSource Commons, which is sort of the open source group that you can kind of think of it as sort of the Agile manifesto of this new group. that's trying to bring open source methods into the enterprise.
Yeah.
I think it's very compatible with Agile. It's not like a, oh, here's the next thing we got to go do. It's just a layer on top of Agile as a management framework.
Yeah, and some of the things that I see with organizations when certain areas start to make progress in having good transparency is it's like, well, now they've got transparency in what they're doing, but then they're still having to give a traditional status report, or there's still all sorts of things like that that
Yeah.
are being run in parallel, which is just so much overhead and so ineffective.
Yeah, I mean that gets back to the idea of like, all right, to culture, it's what I believe that it gets rewarded or punished. And so you're telling me you want to be more transparent, but we're still kind of have our feet in both camps here.
Yeah, exactly.
And then so you got to recognize, all right, what is it I'm solving for? I'm trying to reduce the risk of this project, and you need all these status reports when there's sort of procedural progress. If you're getting to code faster, hopefully shipping code is the measurement of progress, and you don't need to have a status report of all these actions. And automate, you got to automate as much as you can, because when you think about the any organizational change, they call it helpful mechanisms is one terminology. When you think about all the things necessary to drive a change into organization, helpful mechanisms are those things that you automate or do differently that help people change the way they think. They're like, I can't possibly do this because I already have to do this. If you show them that they don't have to do this anymore, then they begin to believe that, oh, well, then we can operate that way. But if you've got a foot in both camp, then you're not going to change. They're going to simply go, oh, great. So I have more work to do.
Yeah. Or we're going to see that you're in that in between state for such a long period of time that that you don't have to be.
Yeah. Now, and you got to start. I mean, where do you start? It's like everything else. You've got to find those groups that are much more experimental. Usually, we see them in innovation teams or teams, really customer facing. Very frequently, mobile teams has always been an entry point for us. They don't have as much legacy that ties them to operating the way things are, and they can become a bit of a vanguard for the rest of the organization. I definitely, don't advocate that people go into just wholeheartedly, okay, we're adopting radical transparency, and overnight.
Exactly.
But it is you don't begin to recognize that there's value to this, and explain that yes, there are trade-offs. There's this in-source commons group. There's a great O'Reilly pamphlet out there called "Understanding the Inner-Source Checklist." There's probably 2 or 3 O'Reilly books actually. That are you there?
I am. Your camera went a little off. It looks like just a nice stock picture of you, Clay. Oh, there we are. It looks like you're switching cameras, and which maybe your camera knew that, as always.
I think I just lost my audio.
Oh no, we can hear you. Yeah, we just we're right at the end of our time, and I swear 30 minutes always goes by so quickly. As Clay's getting
Josh, I think let's see.
his mic back on, I want to be able to share. Yeah, as I wrap up with Clay, once again, anything that you might need from a training, information, coaching perspective, please come see us at processmentors.com. If you haven't been out to the All Things Discipline Agile Community Forum, we're continuing to see membership grow. Lots of good discussions are coming about there. Allthingsda.com is the URL. For training needs, the Discipline Agile Scrum Master, Discipline Agile Senior Scrum Master courses. I've got a number of courses scheduled, as does Glenn Little. Again, please take a look at our course offerings if you're considering Discipline Agile certification. And next week, we will have our Ask Me Anything series where Glenn's going to come back and Clay's going to come back. We might have a surprise guest appearance by two other guests that have been on in the past to be able to field any questions that you might have with respect to the topics that myself, Glenn, and Clay covered, as well as anything else that you can think about. And Clay does have some additional speaking engagements coming up. He's going to be doing a talk, I believe, with Microsoft in the coming weeks. Clay, I don't think you've gotten your mic back going, but reach out to Clay on LinkedIn or follow Clay on LinkedIn if you've got any interest to see some of the other presentations that he's going to be doing. And I would just like to thank everyone for being in attendance today. Thank Clay for spending his time with us, and hope to see you next week. Bye, everyone.